Unforgettable, uncensored, unforgivable. The Unspoken Podcast with Tom Albano, Nick Fodera, and Nick Morgasen on the Undetermined Podcast Network.
You are listening to the Unspoken Podcast, a cheap seat sports production by the Undetermined Podcast Network. I'm Tom Albano, along with Nick Fodera and Nick Morgasen, as always. Gentlemen, we thought at the beginning of the week this was going to be a quiet week, a quiet episode, but no, we've got some interesting topics to talk about.
Thanks, Mark Cuban. You just screwed up everything we had planned.
Well, I was talking to Nick the other day. If you remember, Nick and I were having this conversation about, hey, we're getting ready to prep for this week's podcast. Remember I said to you, it's going to be a nice, quiet week. We're not going to have any problems. We'll be able to have a whole hour to ourselves to talk. And this bullshit happens.
We'll get to all of that. Plus, we have an interview with Ben Golliver later today. Guys, let's just get right into it. So, for those of you who have been sleeping under a rock for the past few days, Sports Illustrated has come out with a smashing story that just came out, and all these allegations of what's been going on inside Dallas Mavericks front office. Basically, a lot of sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, particularly surrounding the former president and CEO of the Dallas Mavericks, as well as one of the reporters, the in-house reporter for the Dallas Mavericks. So, guys, what do you say to this? This is heartbreaking. As somebody, Mark Cuban, we always hear as he is like the last hands-on owner, like the last kind of fan as an owner. You know what I mean? Like a fan who cares just as much of the team as it is for the profit. And it's like, we didn't expect it to come from a place like the Dallas organization. And it kind of is heartbreaking, isn't it?
It is kind of heartbreaking, but I think that there is a lesson to be learned in these things. I mean, every owner that you see, the warm and cuddly ones, and even the cold as ice, heart of stone ones, the ones that don't get involved, they all have got some shady dealings, involved just under the surface. I mean, Howie Spira with George Steinbrenner. I mean, he was hands on, but he wasn't exactly Mr. Moral, and maybe it was foolish of us to expect that Cuban would be Mr. Mormon running the team.
Right. And looking at the Mavericks organization and the way it's been run, now you'll hear it from Ben Golliver from Sports Illustrated, The Crossover, where we talk about how they're probably not the only organization that has these issues, moral complexity issues. And now we're seeing that it's coming out in full color. And we saw it with Donald Sterling and the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, in my opinion, I think that was worse. But to Ben Golliver, we got a different opinion, which you'll be interested in hearing. But it's a bad situation. He got fined $600,000. Not for that, but a different issue we'll get to in a moment. But it's hell week, as Nick put it, for Mark Cuban.
It's the week from hell.
It is. And you know what? There's no way, all this, in the wake of the story, people since the president being accused of sexual assault is no longer working there, then now all of a sudden the attention has shifted to Mark Cuban, meaning, and mind you, these allegations, if you read the story on SI, they stretch back to 1998, and Cuban started owning the team, I think, 2 or 3 years afterwards. So this predates him. But the question that everyone seems to be asking is, what did Mark Cuban know? When did he know it? And if he knew it, why did he not say anything? And that's the operative question here. And I keep going over it in my mind. And I keep going back to the point of, if he's as hands-on as he likes to project that he is, he wants everybody to think that he's the guy who's constantly there, who's constantly involved, who's always pulling for his team and his organization from A to Z, top to bottom. How do you not know these things? And if you know these things, how do you not stop them? He knew. I'm telling you, he knew.
It's just hard for me to imagine that he didn't know. Only because, number one, not only, were these things going back to 1998, but considering Ussery, the person we're talking about here, was under fire in 1998. He had it was an internal investigation. Now, surprise, surprise, he was cleared.
Really?
But then he goes to Under Armour once he leaves the Mavericks, and in only a couple of months, he's outed, for, sexually harassing a female employee in an elevator, and they do something, and he's gone. So it's like, that's my thing, and I've been questioning about all this. It's like, because that thing had to have gotten out about the Under Armour thing, and it's like, how do you not know? It's like, where was the, alarm? Now,
I think, Tom, these issues have been around forever. It's just that these teams don't want to deal with it. By the way, Mark Cuban purchased the team on January 4th, 2000. So it was 2 years after these scandals started happening. But this guy Ussery, and if you saw some of these disgusting acts, fondling, talking about gangbanging, talking about whatever it is, that's all bad.
Nick Morgasen, you even questioned some of the pre-show meeting. How do you get away with saying some of this stuff in the workplace?
Right. And I don't understand how you get away with some of this stuff. And by the way, another part of this story, quickly, before we move on, is you're leaving out that there was national television sitting around this guy, Ussery, when he was making these comments. The ESPN crew was sitting there. Where is the people coming out and talking about this?
Furthermore, I got something more. I was, watching that clip of Rachel Nichols and her monologue on the Jump, and she basically mentioned the reporter. I think, what's the reporter's name?
Oh, Snead, I think.
Oh, Earl Snead.
Earl Snead. Now, here's the thing about Earl Snead. He was arrested and pled guilty to beating up an ex-girlfriend of his. And then he was accused of, when he dated another Mavericks employee, beating her up. I forget if it was the arrest from 2011 or if there was a follow-up arrest. But one of those arrests happened, according to Nichols, if I'm remembering correctly, at the Mavericks office. How do you keep them around?
It was at the Mavericks office. And it's hard to explain why this guy got 3 chances, allegedly, for some of the crimes that he did. But it's a bad situation. Mark Cuban, I think, is finally taking full fall for it.
Well, this is from Rachel Nichols herself about the Mavericks situation.
And how does a man like Mark Cuban, who repeatedly brags about how hands-on he is as an owner, who last year, you may remember, got involved in the minutia of counting the number of games team beat writers attended when deciding how to hand out credentials, say that he never knew any of the stories that it took a couple of reporters just a few months to collect. And if he really didn't know about that situation that was clearly so pervasive, what does that say? And how many other teams have issues like this we haven't heard about yet? The answers here won't be easy, but we need to find them. Because this game is too good, the sport is too good, this league is too good to let something this bad continue.
If there is more teams out there, it's kind of saddening if there is more out there. And this situation is sad enough. So right needs to be done.
I think this started with the Clippers, and now it's we have trickle-down theory coming from a few years ago. I think that was in 2011 or 2012. And now it's trickling down to 2018, and we're seeing more of this come out. And it's just a horrible issue, and I think Adam Silver is going to do the right thing. We saw them set up the NBA hotline for workers who've had issues with abuse and problems, but that's just half the problems that Mark Cuban is facing at this point.
They've traded their professional integrity and dignity, I think, for organizational stability, and that's a problem here.
Now, I want to get to one quick piece of audio. Know how we were talking about how tanking is a major issue in all of sports? So Mark Cuban, talking about Hell Week, was on Dr. J's, Julius Erving's, new podcast called The House Call with Dr. J. And let's put it this way. Hey, Mark, what did you think about tanking and your previous thoughts on it? Let's take a listen.
I'm probably not supposed to say this, but I just had dinner with a bunch of our guys the other night, and here we are. We weren't competing for the playoffs. I was like, look, losing was our best option. And that. But at least I sat down and I explained it to him. And I explained what our plans were going to be this summer, that we're not going to tank again. This is like a year and a half of tanking, and that was too brutal for me.
Yeah.
So we're going to go after it.
That's a hard conversation.
But being transparent, I think that's the key to being a quote-unquote player's owner. Right. And having stability, right, that you've got to communicate.
So that really bothers me because he basically came out and said, we're all right with losing. We're basically going to tank for a year and a half, and I don't give a shit what people say.
You know what? He's not, as Ben Golliver said, he's not technically wrong. It's just optics is everything in the NBA.
Don't come out and say it.
Well, as they say it, don't spray it. Well, he kind of sprayed it.
At least say it's something as, we're struggling right now, I understand, but we'll get through it. Like, don't paint the picture as tanking. And also, furthermore, remember this. Players aren't the ones tanking. Players are going out and trying their best.
Correct. And the way that is this going to trickle down to the players, Tom? You've been asking this all week about whether the players are going to get affected by this. I don't think this is a player's issue. I think that this is just a front office and ownership issue. And the last question we'll ask, and we really can't answer it, is does Mark Cuban have to sell the team?
He should. He won't.
I think it depends on this investigation. I think the league needs to get involved on this investigation, not just the Mavericks.
Yeah, you definitely need an independent arbitrator in this case, but still, I don't.
Well, they have one, but like Nichols' question, how independent is it? Since the Mavericks were the ones that hired it.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. It's the waiting game at this point.
You're listening to the Unspoken Podcast, Cheap Seat Sports Production Party, Undetermined Podcast Network, guys. It's time for. I don't know, guys. How do we describe this? What's this next thing? So we had the NBA All-Star game, but weirdly, and the game was interesting enough. Nick, you saw a bit of it.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of it. It actually was a competitive game. I think it was like a 4-point game. I want to look that up just to be sure. But it actually was I know you guys are saying, oh, it was a typical 280-point scoring game, but it was actually only a 4-point game, and it actually was competitive. So I still think it's a win-win in a sense. Actually, it was a 3-point game. So it was Team LeBron versus Team Stephen Curry, and there was no East, no West anymore. 148-145, so that's 293 points. And
I mean, it's still a little high for my take. It's still a little less defense. I know one of your arguments was that's just what an all-star game is. Maybe I just, I'm too much a fan of MLB and NHL where you can't really be as much. Plus, the NHL has a prize.
Well, they all do. Don't get that mixed up. They all have prizes. The NBA, I think the winning team split like $100K or $150K.
Yeah.
So
okay, I didn't know that.
There's always an incentive. And even in the contracts that these players sign, there's incentives if they make the All-Star game. So they're going to try one way or another. So basically the way to look at this game is it a fun game where we're looking for all the dunks and the alley-oops and the behind-the-back passes and the no-look passes and Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook actually playing together as friends as opposed to enemies? And
so it was better this year, basically.
It was
the basketball version of the Avengers.
Basically, that's a good way to put it. But I still think the story is what happened before the game and not during it.
Yeah, so guys, let's play a little game. Let's see how far we can go into this.
What's so
Okay, so for those of you who don't know what the hell's going on, that is Fergie singing the national anthem before the All-Star game.
Make it stop.
My cerebellum is bleeding.
We didn't even get to the part that made me like, what the hell is going on? And that was when she held that say does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave. I'm like,
you know what? My ears just boom, boom, powed, okay? They just...
Oh, for fuck's sake.
I knew you were going to do that. You promised me you wouldn't do it in the pre-show meeting. You're a liar. You're a filthy, filthy, filthy liar, Morgasen. I should know better than to trust you not to make the easy music pun.
I'm sorry, but you know what? Basically, that describes the performance, and it made your ears explode. And you know what?
Yeah, I see you. I see sharp.
Fuck the both of you. It was a slower and more jazzier version. She tried it. It didn't work. However, I will say it wasn't the worst ever. And
Hello, Roseanne Barr.
I was just going to say Roseanne Barr.
Fergie was bad, but that sounded like a cat thrashing around after waking up in the middle of a circumcision.
Oh,
What?
God. Wait a minute. You know what? Just so the audience is not puking or whatever if they're eating while they're listening to this. But I was going to say this is kind of like the nails on the chalkboard when you're trying to get when the teacher's trying to get the whole class's attention when they're a rowdy bunch, and all of a sudden you're and
You're hurting my ears. God damn it! Stop.
But you know what? That performance was so bad that the NBA players that were watching it were making all these faces.
Particularly Draymond Green.
Draymond Green was the toast of that town right there. Because if you saw the faces that Draymond Green was making, you would rather watch the faces he's making than the national anthem.
Also, Charles Barkley saying that he wanted a cigarette after that.
Are you surprised by that?
Of course not. I mean, Jesus, he's always said shit like that. What does that surprise you?
No, I'm just saying, like, that sums it up.
Exactly. It does sum it up. I don't know what I watched, but I'm oddly captivated by it.
All right, if you have to give the Fergie performance a 1 out of 10 rating, 1 being the worst and 10 being the best, what would you give it?
I would give it a 1 only because the Roseanne Barr performance actually goes into the negatives on my chart.
I would give it a 3 because I can kind of see where she was trying to go, and that's a lot more than a lot of terrible national anthem singers do.
Let's see. What do I give it? Well, I guess because I don't know the logic of 1 through 10, I'm going to give it a 0.0.
Oh, damn. It's worse. That's harsher than me.
Well, if you've ever heard singing before, and she's actually not a bad singer. It's just that
No, she's a great singer.
this was up there with Christina Aguilera at the Super Bowl. So
The birth of one of the most prominent prop bets in Super Bowl history.
Oh, my
You're
God.
listening to the Unspoken Podcast, part of the Undetermined Podcast Network. Guys, let's get into our MLB preview. It's part 3. We're talking about the NL Central. So, guys, I have an idea to start this off. So, let's start this off with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay, that's it. We're good, right? We can move on now. We can move on to another team, or do we actually have to talk about the Pirates?
wait a minute. Did you just do what I think you just did right there? Wow. And I saw you do it, too. By the way, I'm not going to mention that because no one cares what he just did. But basically, this Pittsburgh Pirates team is so bad that it reminds you of the Marlins of 2003 when they sold off.
This isn't even tanking. This is a spectrum of losing that's beyond tanking. It's omni-tanking is what it is.
Here's what I will say. I like some of the players. I like Cervelli because former Yankee. I like Starling Marte. I like Polanco, Dickerson, Harrison, but
He was just traded.
What?
He was just traded.
Oh, that's right. He was traded. I forgot about that.
Dickerson was traded to the Rays for Daniel Hudson.
Oh, that's right. That did happen recently. So Dickerson's not even here. This roster.
How goes that? It's not too late.
Did someone step on a duck? Yes, I did.
Well, I think that sums up the Pirates. Now, I will say this, though. They do have some great pieces. They do have some good talent. So, are they in the tank? No doubt about it. Yes, they are. Are they in the Marlins level of tank? I don't know. I think the Marlins have died down even further.
Well, let's throw one quick projection out. They were 75 and 87 last year. We're definitely saying they're going under 75, right?
Oh yeah, I'm no joke intended, but I'm going to say 69 wins.
Nice.
You had to pick that number, didn't you? You know because we're a fucking uncensored podcast that you had to pick that number.
God bless Rob Gronkowski.
Oh
As
God!
much as I hate Boston teams, Rob Gronkowski, I respect him. Moving on now. Let's go over to Cincinnati because why the hell not?
And we're off to Cincinnati.
Yes, we're off to Cincinnati. So, Zach Cozart ended up signing with the Angels. Gooder Kinnett avoided arbitration. Billy Hamilton avoided arbitration. I mean, there's not much change from this team.
So it would be fair to assume that they'll be the same kind of mediocre they were last year.
The same kind of mediocre shit, basically.
Are you surprised they were in the basement 68 and 94, and you know what? They were 39 and 42 at home and 29 and 52 on the road, which basically means they were non-existent on the road. So you expect this team really to go anywhere, and they really didn't.
And the fact that they lost Zach Cozart now, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think this team gets close, if not reaches 100 losses.
Yeah, I think
if I was Joey Votto, I'd have to get a little Bastille Betty in this case. I mean, it's got to be almost like he's in prison.
Oh, I think it's time for him to say dilly dilly and get out.
Yeah. You know what? I won't give them 100 losses. I'll say they just avoided, though. I'm going 63-99 with this team.
I'm going 65 and 97.
They're done. I think they're going. I think they're 100 losses.
You think 62 and 100?
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. All right. So let's travel over to St. Louis. Let's go to the Cardinals. So
not much has happened.
Yeah, I mean, but they lost Lance Lynn. Lance Lynn, I think, is still a free agent, correct?
Yes, he's still a free agent, and I'm surprised they haven't tried to make a move for him.
I know. Lance Lynn helped that team quite a bit last year.
Right.
Well,
and
it's the Cardinals. Whatever a rational decision is, they do the opposite. If not the opposite, they do the sideways version of it, which is the right decision, but critically low.
Right. One move that I actually think makes them better is they got Ozuna from the Marlins.
That is true.
Yeah, well, that's in that case. That's just that's taking candy from a sucker.
Well, yeah, I guess like Stan to the Yankees, Ozuna to the Cardinals was kind of just a done deal.
Also, their reliever, Seung Wang Ho, I think he's still a free agent.
Yeah, he's not on the bullpen depth chart, which I'm looking at now. So
bad bosses and pitching staff.
Yeah. But Carlos Martinez, Michael Wacha, Adam Wainwright, I really don't know the guys after that at this point. I haven't heard of those guys.
Dexter Fowler, Yadier Molina on the offense.
Matt Carpenter also. I don't know. This is a tough – are they going to be a playoff team? That's a tough call at this point. I don't know. They were 83 and 79, so they were basically a 500 team all season.
I'll give them the same record. I think 83-79.
I'd go exactly 500, 81 and 81.
They're going to be around 500, but I think a little over. So I think they'll be like 85 and what is that? 85 and 75 or 85 and 77.
Yeah, 85 and 77. Let's go over to Chi-Town, the rivals of the St. Louis Cardinals, the Chicago Cubs. A lot of their players last year elected free agency. Jake Arrieta, Alex Avila, Wade Davis, John Jay, John Lackey, Koji Urea. But they added, in arguably, one of the biggest moves of this offseason, they signed Yu Darvish to a 6-year, $126 million deal.
Overpaid. Major overpay.
Overpaid.
Yeah, we discussed that before on the podcast, but that is significant enough of a move, I think, to make an impact on what at least my prediction for this team was going to be this year.
Right. And just looking at this team, I still think they're one of the best infields in all of baseball. Rizzo, Baez, Russell, I'm still on the fence with Russell because I don't know how good he's going to be. Chris Bryant kind of had a up and down year, especially with the injury a little bit, but he'll hit you 30, 35 home runs. This whole infield could technically hit 30 to 35 home runs.
Let's not forget Schwarber.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the outfield, you have Schwarber, Hayward, Happ.
They're a good team. They're a good all-around team. And even Hayward, when he's healthy, he could probably hit you between 15 and 25 home runs if he could stay on the field. They're pitching Lester, Darvish, Hendricks, Quintana. They have a great four. And then their bullpen, bringing in Morrow. Carl Edwards Jr., who was a big addition when they won the World Series. Just they're a great overall team. They just got to stay healthy, and they have to all be consistent. And Schwarber also.
I'll go 93 and 69. I'll give them another game. I think this is a good team. I still think this is a good team.
I'll go with 95 and 67.
Huh.
Yeah, that sounds about right, about 95 wins. I don't think it's going to be more than that. I still think they're going to struggle with eventually when they get to the playoffs with a team like Washington and the Dodgers, but I think 95 is about right.
Now, last team, guys, I think arguably the team that can give the Cubs the biggest run for their money this season, the Milwaukee Brewers, adding the likes of Christian Yelich and Lorenzo Cain in the offseason.
Those were great additions. They made great moves. 86 and 76 last season.
Well, they had the lead for most of the year, but then the last couple months, they took a major skid and I think missed the playoffs, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they did. The home and the road record were pretty similar. They were one of the few teams to be over 500 on both fronts for the home and the road. 46 and 38 at home, 40 and 38 on the road. You mentioned two good moves, Lorenzo Cain and Christian Yelich. Now, Christian Yelich was pretty much given to them, so I don't know if they actually would have made that move right off the bat. But just looking at their depth chart, Eric Thames at first. He was kind of that hot commodity beginning of last season. Yelich, bronze back in left field, even though I think he's a big cheater, but that's a whole different issue for another day. Lorenzo Cain, good. Their bullpen is young, but I think it's a great bullpen. I don't know their starters that well. I know Davies and I know Chacin, but I think they can be good. It's going to be a tough fought competition.
What was their overall record?
86 and 76.
I think they can do better than that. I think they can bust into, let's say, 91, 92 wins.
I am going to agree with Nick. I think they will give the Cubs a big run for their money. And I could see that division going either way, where either the Cubs win or the Brewers win, with the other team probably making one of the wild card spots.
I think that having Yelich and having Cain gives them veteran experience. So I think that's going to help the younger guys who haven't had that experience before. So I think they break into the 90 wins category, 91, 92 wins.
So I'll give the division to the Cubs. I won't do the wild cards yet, but I will note that I am considering the Brewers for one of the two NL wild cards.
Yeah, I'm going to wait before I pick a division winner because I still need to see more.
I think it's the Cubs. I just think they're the best overall team in this division. As long as they stay healthy and they stay within their mental capacity, they should win the division, no problem.
I want to go on to one last story before we go to our interview. So there is this Russian curler, and, they can't compete under the Russian flag. It's the Olympic athletes from Russia.
OAR, yep.
The OAR. And this Russian athlete tests positive. He fails a drug test and has to give up the medal that he won.
Well, I have the name of the drug if people are interested. Do you want to know the name of the drug?
Yeah.
Okay, so the drug that this Russian athlete tested positive for is called meldonium. Now, does anyone know what meldonium is?
No, Mr. Morgasen, what's meldonium?
Oh, shut up. Basically, meldonium may be used to treat coronary artery disease and sometimes leads to other weird conditions where there's too little blood flow to the organs in the body, especially the heart. And because this drug is thought to expand the arteries, it helps to increase the blood flow as well as increase the flow of oxygen through the body. All right, science lesson over. Thoughts?
And it helps increase.
I only have one thought. I want to see one guy get busted for, I don't know, injecting some kind of serum made up of ground up parrot anuses, because God knows that would make the interview really, really interesting. Are you on parrot anuses? No, sir. No, parrot anuses. Oh.
Well, it could be worse. You could be on a deer antler spray like Ray Lewis was.
Oh, parrot anuses are more fun.
Wait, who remembers the movie Dodgeball, where that one Girl Scout tested positive for, it was like a beaver tranquilizer?
Yes, beaver tranquilizers, yes.
So, we had a wild week in sports this week, if you couldn't tell already. So, we actually got Ben Golliver from Sports Illustrated, the crossover, to talk with us. about the Mavericks situation mainly, but also just some stuff going on in the NBA, like the All-Star game and Fergie's performance. Golliver had quite a mind, quite the things to say.
Yes, and it gave us a point of view that was different from most people. He also talked about LeBron and what he thought about the playoff format, and there was just quite a bit of uniqueness in this interview, including how he thought Donald Sterling compared to Mark Cuban.
So let's dig into that interview with Ben Golliver now. Joining us now on the Unspoken Podcast is Ben Golliver of Sports Illustrated's The Crossover. Ben, how you doing?
I'm good, guys. How you guys doing?
Doing all right. So let's get, I guess, right into it. So a lot going on in Dallas this week. So a big story, of course, broke from Sports Illustrated about the inner workings of the Dallas Mavericks and what's been going on behind the scenes in the front office. Could you tell us a little bit about how this story on the Mavericks came to be? And I should clarify to you and to those in the audience, I'm not asking for anything like sources or stuff. A story like this just doesn't pop up out of nowhere. Like, this usually is like an explosion of different things, and it develops over time. Can you take us through that process?
No, I mean, that's definitely a great question for John Wertheim, the guy who wrote it. I mean, his investigations, are pretty well done at this point. I think he was very influential in revealing a lot of, unfortunate behavior with the Carolina Panthers in the NFL. And I think once you start to make a name for yourself, or you're seen as someone that people can trust with information, whether it's private, delicate, or, potentially career-altering in terms of, women being involved in situations and worried about being blackballed or something like that in the professional environment. Once you're seen as being someone who can be trusted with that, I think information probably starts to come your way. And they obviously did a lot of digging and research into that story. It's the kind of thing where, that was top secret. Most of us within SI, probably didn't know about it until a few days before it posted. But, his tips and tricks are what you're going to have to ask him about that. But I think the important takeaway from the story is just starting conversations. The little things that kind of added up over the course of 15, 20 years for Dallas, to me, wound up, setting the stage for some really big things, including keeping a reporter from the team website, basically on the payroll until this week, despite multiple violent incidents and an arrest at the team practice facility. I mean, to me, that is very unusual by NBA standards. When I saw that, I was very surprised that a team would do that. That's why I thought the takeaway from the story for me was, we really need to train our attention on Mark Cuban, the owner. This is a guy who has made a reputation throughout his career as wanting to be a maverick, wanting to be outside the lines, kind of in the gray area. He's always getting fined for criticizing the officials and going on the court and, really being this independent thinker who wants to push the boundaries. And what I thought my takeaway from the story was, if you have an owner like that, who's willing to kind of set that kind of example, it really allows, bad actors within your organization to flourish, to continue to have really important influence, and it puts other people, particularly women in this case, repeatedly into situations where they didn't feel like they had advocates, they didn't feel like they had anyone they could trust, and, ultimately a lot of those employees left or kind of decided to leave. So I think this one really falls on Cuban's shoulders. I think in the investigation piece, the way Wertheim wrote it, he didn't want to point fingers like that, but I think that was the obvious takeaway. And I think going forward, when you have an investigation the Mavericks are running and you have the NBA looking at it, I think Mark Cuban is in some pretty serious hot water here.
Well, that being the case, Ben, what do you think the actual, consequences, the professional implications are for Mark Cuban in the wake of this story?
Well, the first thing I'd say is look at what Adam Silver's kind of already done. I don't think it's coincidental that he throws this gigantic fine at Mark Cuban for the comments about tanking, one day after this story breaks. Now, Cuban's done all sorts of stuff over the course of his ownership tenure, including challenging David Stern on the court, during game over, foul calls, which is, an awful look for the league and its credibility, right? But here we have a $600,000 fine from Adam Silver to Mark Cuban, basically for a comment that he made on Dr. James' podcast of all places, right? That was not a very widely circulated comment, and it wasn't even that revolutionary of a comment. He basically just said, hey, our team's not very good this year, so our best option is to lose. Now, he shouldn't say that publicly according to the league, but he did. Instead of giving him a slap on the wrist, Silver comes through and gives him, basically the biggest fine of his career. And to me, I read that as a warning shot. I think that's the NBA league office saying, look, Mark, you tried to, be this guy who does it his way, kind of skirts the rules. We see him, like during free agency recruitment, he'll be out there drinking with players at the bar. He's trying to, sign. He just does things, outside the norm of the NBA owners. And I think what Adam Silver is like, look, now that we've seen these allegations, it's time for you to get back in line. And I don't think that first fine was a coincidence. And then when we go forward, Silver has an awful lot of power, as we saw during, the Donald Sterling incident. I mean, he can, if the owners turn against him, like in a worst case scenario, if really, really bad stuff, even more bad stuff comes to light, maybe stuff that implicates Cuban directly, there's always a possibility in a worst case scenario where they try to remove him as owner. Now, I don't assume or think that will happen because as the investigation made clear, this wasn't about Cuban's behavior and it wasn't about any of the players' behavior. It was about a few specific employees in the organization. But there could be very big fines coming. There could be other, forms of punishment from the league office. And we're just going to have to see what the investigation reveals. And if there's one disappointing thing to me, it's that the NBA didn't lead this investigation by itself. They allowed the Mavericks to kind of run the investigation. I think that's tricky. I mean, if this had been a one-time thing or just, one incident and they wanted to kind of clean things up, okay, you can keep that in-house. But to me, the NBA should have run this thing completely independently, and the Mavericks should have been open to that. But that's not how it played out.
Looking at some of the implications, and a lot of people are comparing this to the Donald Sterling situation that happened a few years ago. Some people could be right, some people could be wrong. Would you really compare this to the Donald Sterling situation in any way?
Well, in terms of the ability to draw headlines and, potentially, make changes, I would say yes. I mean, in terms of, like, the direct involvement of a key person or the sensationally, like, awful audio that we were able to hear, then no. I mean, look, if we had video of the Dallas Mavericks president saying these things to women and the things that he's quoted as saying, I think the story would be very comparable to what happened with Sterling. But you got to remember, 2018, visual, audio, that always takes it to the next level. I mean, look at the Ray Rice case, right? I mean, wasn't that the one that sort of finally broke through here when it came to domestic violence, stuff like that? And what did that require? It wasn't just people saying what happened. It was the actual, ability to watch it unfold. And I think, that is one key difference to me is that, this story is going to resonate with a lot of people. I expect it's going to lead to a lot of changes, both within the Mavericks and in terms of how they do things, and also with the NBA league office. Like, you already saw from the league, they're trying to set up like the call center hotline. People can report, sexual harassment. I mean, to me, that's the kind of thing that should have existed 10, 15 years ago. So good for them for figuring it out, but, better late than never kind of. But, in terms of the sensational nature of the story, Sterling is always going to stand above, and that's why Adam Silver took such a forceful approach against him. And remember, that was very early in Silver's tenure. It was his first big test, and I think most of the people in the league, whether it's players, other owners, they all kind of believe he passed that test because of how hard he was on Sterling. But I don't think that sets the standard here necessarily. Like, you don't have to try to run every bad owner out of the league because, let's be frank, like every organization, every owner, most people out there, they've got stuff to hide, and you don't want to have a precedent where your whole league is just banishing everybody left and right for whatever transgression might become. And the one thing about the Mavericks, which makes them so fascinating and definitely a lot different than Sterling's Clippers, is that they were a gold standard on the basketball court for consistent success. Outside of the Spurs, for about a 10-year period there, nobody was winning more consistently than the Mavericks. And it wasn't just the title that they got in 2011. I mean, these guys were pumping out 50-win seasons, and they were seen as, one of the league's best organizations. So I think that makes this an even more valuable learning experience for everybody. It's like, if it can happen with a team that's doing great from all intents and purposes on the court, then it can happen everywhere. And we should probably, make sure that every team around the league kind of looks at, into their own organization and tries to root this stuff out.
Now, Ben, I must ask, do you think Mark Cuban's ownership style and his aggressive personality, how he's a very hands-on owner, could have in some way contributed to the culture of the Mavs front office?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And I don't say that just for Mark Cuban. I say that for any boss. Employees, especially in big organizations, always take their cue from the boss. And like I mentioned earlier, his track record, here's some of the things he's been fined for. I mean, complaining about the officiating, misconduct during the 2016 finals, outbursts against the refs, physically confronting referees, tampering with LeBron James, criticizing the training camp rules, making a derogatory gesture. At one point, he sat on the baseline during a game, which was considered un-owner-like. I mean, this guy's got a rap sheet with the NBA, unlike any other owner out there. I mean, he's been fined easily, more than $1 million. I believe it's closing in on $2 million at this point. When your owner behaves like that, it just tells everybody else, like, hey, we're doing things different here, and it also says that this guy's probably going to view whatever I do wrong in my job in a different light than a more button-down type owner. And that's just a fact. I mean, that doesn't mean he's directly responsible for, someone else's behavior, but he contributed to the culture. There's no doubt about it. And look, he's even admitted that he made a mistake on not firing the Mavs.com writer. And I think it's obvious. And the logic he was trying to use to explain it away was very much questionable. I mean, his thinking was, well, we didn't want him to go to another team and do it somewhere else. And that makes no sense at all. So you're going to let him do it in your own organization and potentially put your own employees at risk? I mean, what kind of thought process is going on there? And, I think for Cuban, I mean, he clearly is successful for some of the reasons why people criticize him, right? Like, he's got a huge ego. He's going to do it his way. He's unbending. He has very clear, thoughts and principles on, basically everything. I mean, he's a thinker. He's a guy who toys with ideas, all the time. That's how he made his money. But you sometimes have to have people around you to balance some of those skills and protect you from yourself a little bit. And I think what this story, this investigation tells us is that he didn't have those people, or the people that he hired weren't trustworthy, whether it was his HR director, whether it was the team president who was engaged in all this bad behavior. But I did think it was very, striking and a bad look against Cuban, where you have the contrast between the Mavericks team president being in his role for 15 plus years in Dallas with all these things going on, and then as soon as he gets to Under Armour, he's out within 2 months, right? And so that tells me, like, in Under Armour, they've got a culture with an HR department that works, and someone complained, and that was that. It's sort of a zero tolerance type of thing, and he was gone. And clearly, that did not exist in Dallas. And the only person you can hold responsible for that is Mark Cuban.
Now, because of that, I mean, do you see the Mavs front office surviving this structurally intact, in the sense that, is there any way they get out of this with their, being able to completely be structurally intact with this? Or is this going to be a complete teardown of the management from A to Z?
Well, here's the thing. Most NBA teams have a clear division between basketball operations and business operations. So the basketball operations side was not really implicated in any of this. That goes for the players, that goes for Cuban himself, and that goes for the front office executive, the coaching staff. I mean, there wasn't anything like that. And frankly, you're going back to whether it would be as big of a story as the Clippers. Had that happened, like had you had coaches involved or players involved, I think the story probably would have been 10 times bigger than it already was. But I think when most fans conceive of the NBA front office, they're conceiving of that basketball operations side. And I think because there haven't been any allegations or kind of questions about that, I'm not sure there's going to be any turnover on that side at all. Now, in terms of the business side, remember, the president's already gone because he left. The HR director, who was kind of in the middle of all this, was fired, and the Mavs reporter was fired. So those are three pretty big figures in this story who are already out. Now, I think from the investigation standpoint, you're going to see who's next. Are there going to be anyone else who was part of what Wertheim called a corrosive environment? Is there going to be anyone else who is part of this animal house-like environment that was described in the story? If there were, then I would suspect that Cuban's going to have no choice but to get rid of him, if only to make sure he's in good standing with the NBA league office. But that's the type of question that you can't really answer until that investigation is completed.
You talked about before the NBA hotline. They're starting to come up with that, and they're trying to figure out these issues. Do you see more other ways to get this solved? Like, do you see Adam Silver taking a more strict stance, like we've seen in the NFL with the sexual abuse problems? They're trying to get those under control, and the NFL had a problem going with outside sources. Do you see the NBA going with direct outside sources so they don't end up with the same issue as the NFL did?
What do you mean by outside sources?
Like outside investigators, because like in the NFL, the outside investigators, they went to the outside investigators because they had a problem internally with the NFL at the top.
Yeah, so I mean, the part of the problem is, Dallas is running this investigation, the one that's coming, right? And that's a little weird. Like, they're the ones who are financing it, and the lawyers who they've contracted to do this are considered to be, basically experts in this type of stuff, and they're going to be rock solid, right? But what makes me nervous is, okay, that report comes out. Do we get to see that report, or does Dallas clean it up a little bit, pass it on to the NBA. The NBA cleans it up a little bit, and then we get to see the final version. I just think it would be better for all involved parties if Adam Silver had stepped in and said, look, there's enough information in the Sports Illustrated report that this is a league issue, not a team issue. We're going to go ahead and find the best outside firm that we can, and we're going to be the people kind of in charge of that. Now, I don't know exactly that negotiation process went between the team and the league. Maybe Cuban just said, look, I'll take care of it. I'll fire these people. And Adam Silver said, okay, as long as you're going to take quick action here and you realize this is a big deal, we'll let you run it. I mean, it's always possible the NBA comes back and decides to do, a second investigation down the road. But, I think we have to see how this first one plays out. And we're just not going to know, because if it was just really about mainly about that team president, just running roughshod over the culture and being really creepy for 15 years, the investigation is not really going to give Mavericks much else to work with, right? I mean, the best practices in terms of sexual harassment, training and protocol and zero tolerance and all that. I mean, you can put that in, but what else are you really going to do if it was about one person? I mean, you would expect that if it was wider spread, it would lead to employees being let go, new employees hired, strengthening of the HR department, things like that. Those would be the type of recommendations you would expect from an investigation. And let's just hope the one the Mavericks are running winds up being, independent enough to be successful.
Going back to what you said about the locker room being, cleared, that everything in the locker room, the players, coaches, etc., seem to not be involved in the situation. So if something else comes down from the NBA, how do you think they can go about that without it affecting the on-court action? Like, I know when the Penn State thing with Jerry Sandusky happened, they gave the players the chance to transfer out without any penalty. But the Larry Nassar thing happened, they were concerned about if there was a punishment from the IOC, how do you, try to not affect the athletes as much? Like, what did they do in this situation if something else came down?
Well, it would depend on who's involved. Obviously, if it continues to be a business side thing, look, that's something the Mavericks are just going to have to deal with. Competitive organization. If they get a black stain or a black mark, and guys don't want to sign there as free agents, or it changes how people with that team. So that's on Dallas. I mean, they can't really control that. In terms of the games themselves, I mean, obviously we expect this investigation to take a while, right? I wouldn't be surprised at all if they don't finish it until after the season's already complete. I mean, we only have 6-7 weeks left in the regular season, and the Mavericks are going to not make the playoffs. I think from the player standpoint for Dallas, it helps that they're not very good, because they don't have a ton of media covering them as an organization right now compared to when they're one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the league. And so I would expect it's not really going to be that distracting for them in the short term. Now, I think the longer term implications of, does this become a team where there are a few organizations like this around the league that get a reputation for being a place guys don't want to go. The Phoenix Suns have had kind of an anti-player friendly reputation. Lots of guys trying to push their way out of there. The Clippers, before this recent era with Donald Sterling, definitely had that reputation. I think the Sacramento Kings right now have kind of a reputation of not doing things, A+ across the board in terms of, just being, competitive. They've missed the playoffs for more than a decade straight. So you get these organizations which already are struggling, and sometimes they have a harder time kind of competing for guys. I think that is one possibility here with the Mavericks, where, if really salacious stuff comes out in the next investigation, where it's like, I don't really want to be associated with that team if I don't have to. If I have my choice between 2 teams in free agency, maybe I'm going to pick a team besides the Mavericks. But, we'll have to see, if those kinds of revelations do occur, and we'll have to see if, the players value that. I mean, it's going to be a good test this summer, because Dallas will be able to be a player in free agency. I mean, they're going to have, the flexibility to go out there and sign players, and, it's quite possible that most people by July, when free agency starts, it's quite possible that most of the players just view this as being resolved and taken care of. And I do think the common refrain you're going to hear from Mark Cuban and probably from the people who are in his organization for doing the recruiting of free agents, you're going to hear, look, that's the business side. We're going to take care of it. We're all about basketball here. We're basketball first. I mean, that's something he said ever since he owned the team, and he put video game consoles in the locker room and did all the rest of it. Pumped up their practice facility. I mean, he's always made it very clear he's about basketball first, and players appreciate that perspective. And I think that most players care a lot more about what happens on the court and their teammates and their locker room than they care about what happens on the business side of an organization.
Now, if we must backtrack a little bit to earlier in Mark Cuban's really horrible week. You mentioned before you heard what he said on Dr. J's podcast about where he said losing is the best option. Now, did he put his foot in his mouth? Is he in the wrong, or is he just articulating what a lot of other NBA owners don't want to actually say out loud for fear of hurting ticket sales?
Yeah, it's not even ticket sales. I think it's fear of angering the NBA league office, which likes to pretend, sit up on a high horse and kind of pretend that tanking doesn't happen. Tanking in the NBA is a very sensitive subject. It happens every single year. It's happened as long as I've been covering the game, which is a decade now. Sometimes it's really, really blatant. Guys getting shut down even when they're healthy for 30, 40 games so their teams can lose. I mean, we happen to be in the middle of a gigantic tank right now around the league where there's like 8 or 9, 10 different teams all trying to lose. I mean, it's particularly egregious this year. You can understand why if you're the league commissioner, you don't want people talking about that with your playoffs coming up. You want them talking about the playoffs because that's what you view as the real story. And certainly during a weekend like All-Star Weekend, it's supposed to be a celebration of the league. All the legends are there. They're clearly trying to make some political statements in terms of, pumping up Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar during the All-Star game and trying to pay tribute to, some of the forefathers of the game and sort of their impact on culture and race relations and all of that. And then here you have on the side, again, Mark Cuban being a distraction and saying, oh yeah, we're trying to lose on purpose. Of course we are. It's our best bet for rebuilding our organization. You just don't want to hear that. And he's not wrong. I mean, his strategy is correct. If you're stuck in the middle or if you're a bad team, you're better off being really, really, really bad and getting yourself a superstar in the lottery. I mean, everyone has kind of followed that strategy for years, and it's paid real dividends. I mean, the Pelicans would be nothing without Anthony Davis, and imagine the Cavaliers had they never had LeBron James. What does their franchise look like? So, the importance of those really high top picks are huge, and for the Mavericks, they need somebody after Dirk, right? I mean, that's the whole point is at some point Dirk's going to retire, and they need a new franchise player, and Dennis Smith Jr. is somewhat intriguing as a point guard, but if you're Dallas, for sure, the best thing you can take from this season would be a top 5 draft pick. I mean, there's not really anything else happening on the court, right? So, for Cuban to say what he did, it's kind of like Adam Silver's Achilles heel or his soft spot or his touchy point, You just don't do that. Of course, you're going to get a reaction, and it just shows again. Cuban, a lot of times thinks he's above the law because he has so much money, he can just pay his way out of it, right? The worst thing that happens is he gets fined, he pays a fine, he moves on, and I think that's probably frustrating to Adam Silver, who's got to keep up appearances as the NBA commissioner.
Moving on to a lighter topic to get away from the seriousness of the NBA. What did you think about the NBA All-Star game this past Sunday? And did you feel it was a more competitive game than last year? And what did you actually think of the format not going East or West?
Well, it was a much more competitive game. The last 2 or 3 All-Star games, I had to write basically the same column, which was, these guys aren't trying hard, it's a waste of time, and it's a really bad look for the NBA. And the first time I wrote that column, everyone called me an old man and said I was grumpy and said I needed to lighten up. And the second time I did it, a few other people agreed with me. And then the third time I did it, everyone agreed. And somehow Adam Silver and Chris Paul are having this big summit about, how can we fix the All-Star game. It was really broken these last couple of years. I mean, the scores were just absolutely outrageous. Guys were just letting people dunk, letting people get layups. It was really inexplicable because if you go back through the history of the All-Star game, yeah, I mean, guys are going to score 150 points, but there's a difference between 150 and 190. That effort level being not there, I thought was bad for the NBA because, one, they charge an arm and a leg for the tickets to go to the game. And if you're not really getting your money's worth, that's frustrating. 2, it's the biggest showcase during the middle of the season. Probably, that or Christmas are the NBA's 2 mid-season moments. And it just seemed like an opportunity lost where, global fans who may not tune in to, every single NBA TV or League Pass game are getting a chance to see all the stars, but the stars aren't really bringing it. I mean, that seems like a totally missed opportunity. So I give a lot of credit, 1, for the NBA acknowledging they had a problem. 2, to LeBron James for deciding to show up and push really hard because he definitely set the tone down the stretch of those closing minutes. I mean, he was fabulous in the last couple of minutes. The step back 3 over Embiid, the quick pass sequence, with Kyrie, that leads to a layup. His amazing stand with Kevin Durant on Steph Curry, kind of denying him that final shot. LeBron gets a lot of credit for that. In terms of the format, though, the shakeup, part of the problem is the West has consistently dominated the East in the All-Star game because there's just a lot more stars there. So you break up, that conference in balance. You give LeBron some better teammates, guys like KD and Russell Westbrook, and surprise, surprise, you have a more competitive game. And it's a big problem in the league. It continues to be a problem. The talent is all out West, much less in the East. And same thing goes for the best teams in the league this year. The two best teams are Houston and Golden State. Both those teams are in the West. And if San Antonio was fully healthy, you could have a really strong argument that they would be the third best team. And so I think playing with the All-Star game by breaking up the conferences and doing the Team LeBron versus Team Steph thing and having captains, to me, it was like a trial run to see if they should change the playoff format. And I think, Adam Silver made some comments about that at All-Star Weekend, and that could be coming here in a few years. I mean, they could be looking to try to take the East and West part out of the playoffs as well. If they did, I would certainly welcome, because year after year after year, the Western Conference has been better head-to-head against the Eastern Conference, and there's been lots of years where, if you pick the finals between the top two teams in the league, both those teams would come from the West. And I think from a revenue standpoint, if you're the NBA and you want to make as much money as possible, especially when you're globally focused, and fans in China or Europe do not care about the East versus West in America. What do they care? We don't care about time zones in China, do we? Obviously not. I think it makes more sense to just kind of scrap it, take the top 16 teams, put them in a normal, playoff format where the best teams can meet each other in the finals. And if that happens to be like Houston versus Golden State this year, I think that would be the best case scenario. I think that would be the best finals from a basketball perspective and from a drama perspective. And it's a shame that we're not going to get that in the finals. We have to get that in the Western Conference finals.
What are your thoughts on Fergie's national anthem performance and the faces that some of the players made?
Well, here's the thing. The players were at a disadvantage compared to me because I was out there an hour early, so I heard her warm up. Let me tell you, her warm-up was just as bad as her real rendition. And she kept going back to the tech guys, like the audio guys, saying, hey, I need to change this in my ear. I need to change the music. I need to do this. Like, she got all these kind of complaints as she was doing it. So I think she knew it wasn't good. Everybody was kind of standing around listening to it during warm-ups. I mean, people weren't like, going nuts or whatever, but I certainly was like, this doesn't seem good. I'm not a music expert. I would never pretend to be one. So I got the preview about an hour before, and then I guess despite all of her requests for changes and this and that and the other thing, she just went out there and did the same thing, and obviously it completely bombed, and the videos were hilarious, but I was glad, honestly, that LeBron came to her rescue, though. Because, if he hadn't played hard in the last 4 or 5 minutes, there was going to be a lot more Fergie columns than there were. And the fact that he really showed up and saved that fourth quarter, it kind of diverted attention away from her, and the writers could write about basketball. And that's how I think it should be.
LeBron has seemed to have a lot of power over structure and draft and playoff format, and he's come out and said, I don't want the playoff format to change, and Adam Silver has talked about changing the playoff format to a 1-16 seeding. Do you think this is LeBron with his ego of 7 straight NBA finals, or do you think it's just wanting to protect the tradition of the playoff format?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I don't know if it's ego or just self-interest, right? And that's a big problem of why, they've had all the Eastern Conference owners are like, oh, you want to change the format so we have less of a chance of making the playoffs? No, we don't want to do that. And it would go with the same thing for LeBron. If you could have an easier path to the finals, of course you would want to keep that. I also do think that LeBron cares about tradition, though. And the East versus West thing, by the way, goes all the way back to 1950. So if Silver does change this, it's going to be pretty radical. But I think he's the type of guy to do it. Just because when you listen to what he cares about, it's global, digital, it's the future, and it's, revenue. I mean, those are the things that he's always kind of constantly harping on it. And the things that he's getting the NBA involved in, it's virtual reality, mixed reality, they're striking deals left and right. Even this gambling thing, I think, again, a lot of that is digital focus, having fans who are kind of placing bets on their phones as the games are going. It's all kind of just, engaging people in as many ways as possible, just getting them completely sucked into your NBA game. And here's the thing. If you have a bunch of sweeps in the playoffs, and if you have a bunch of 10, 15-point victories in the playoffs like we saw last year, that has a real impact. I mean, number one, it means fewer playoff games, so you make less money. Number two, the ratings are going to go down eventually if they keep being blowout. And then number three, if you're trying to cultivate new fans, younger fans, they want to see the same drama, right? Like, I remember Michael Jordan at the buzzer basically over Brian Russell to win the title. Like, that's a memory from my childhood that's basically burned in forever. I will never forget it. It doesn't work if, the great moment of the finals is the Warriors being up by 35 points, or like, remember how they closed up the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals? Those games were not even close. I mean, the Spurs, bless their heart, they were trying hard without Kawhi Leonard, but they were just completely overmatched, and they go into the post-game press conferences and they're like, yeah, we don't have a chance. That kind of stuff is not good for the league, and whatever steps they can take from a bracket standpoint to ensure the best teams play each other and to ensure all of the best teams stay in the playoffs for as long as possible, that's how you're going to make the most money. That's how you're going to grow the game globally. That's how you're going to accomplish sort of all the things that Silver wants to accomplish. So I'm ready for it. I'm bracing for it. It may be a couple of years till he decides on what kind of format he wants to use, but I think it's coming regardless of what that tradition might have been in the past.
Ben Golliver of Sports Illustrated Crossover. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, guys. Take care.
So that's going to do it for this edition of the Unspoken Podcast. Go like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope, all at the UDUP. Go like the Undetermined Podcast Network itself on Facebook, Twitter, at the UD Network. And that's going to do it. For Nick Morgasen, for Nick Fodera, I'm Tom Albano. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to the Unspoken Podcast, the Cheap Seat Sports production, part of the Undetermined Podcast Network. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.